and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about mindful eating. So mindfulness is a process that we can bring to lots of different areas of our life. But today in particular, we're going to talk about how to use mindfulness with eating. And this is definitely a skill that we can all improve on and bring to our life. And it can help us have a better relationship with our food, moderate what we eat, enjoy the food we eat more, pay attention more to our food, and be more intentional about our choices around food. So let's go ahead and dive in. So we are going to talk about what mindful eating is. We are also going to talk about how to do it. And then we're actually going to go through a mindful eating exercise. I'm going to be using a Hershey's Kiss today, but you can use any other small candy that's wrapped or not, or a piece of fruit, a nut, a raisin, just a small piece of food that you can savor and enjoy. And so if you want to have that ready, feel free, or you can always come back to this podcast at another time and go through that exercise when you want to do that. Okay. So first of all, what is mindful eating? So mindfulness in general means focusing on the present moment. That can be focusing on your feelings, your thought, your bodily sensations. And so mindful eating really means eating with all of our senses, our sight, our taste, our sound, smell, and touch. It means paying attention to both our physical and emotional responses to food. And that can happen before we eat, while we're eating, and after we eat. So really connecting with food and eating as opposed to just doing it. So the very first step to being able to eat mindfully is to eliminate distractions in your environment. So if we want to pay more attention to our food and be more intentional about it, and we want to try to make sure we're eating an appropriate amount of food that makes us feel full and satisfied without overeating, and that we're eating a good mixture of foods, we want to get rid of distractions from our brain that are keeping us from being able to eat in a mindful way. So one of the most common distractions for people is the TV. Many people eat while watching TV, and I'm sure most people have done this at some point in their life, even if it's not a regular habit. And what I find, and what many people find when they are watching TV, is it's really easy to suddenly look down and realize the food you were eating is gone, but you didn't really feel like you enjoyed it. So maybe you had a bowl or a bag of chips or a cookie, and you were watching a show, watching a sports game, and all of a sudden you look down and it's gone. And you're like, oh man, I thought I had a couple more bites left, right? Have you ever had that happen? It's like so disappointing, and you really want more. And sometimes it triggers you to eat more, right? You were only planning to have that one cookie, but you didn't really pay attention to it. You didn't really enjoy it. And now you're sort of wanting another one to have that experience. But other common ways that we are distracted while we're eating is with our phone, right? Maybe we're checking email or just scrolling, watching videos. Maybe we're reading a magazine, reading something on the internet. Maybe we're working. This happens a lot. And I will admit that I do this a little bit too, which is we're so busy. We have so much we want to catch up on. Many of us work from home nowadays, and so maybe you don't even really have a formal lunch break the way you used to in an office setting, and really easy to just keep working while you're eating. And the same sort of thing happens, right? All of a sudden you look down and the food's gone, and you feel like, I didn't even really enjoy it. I didn't even really feel like I had a lunch. I didn't have a break. Was it good? I don't even know. I don't remember. So when we're distracted, it's really hard to eat mindfully. And it's also really hard to eat as healthy because it's easy to overeat. We don't feel full and satisfied because we're not paying attention to the food, and we don't enjoy it as much. And when we don't enjoy it, sometimes that triggers us to keep eating other food, because a lot of us like that enjoyment from food, right? We want that pleasure. We want that dopamine in our brain. And if we didn't get that because our brain was too distracted while we were eating, then we may end up overeating or eating foods we weren't planning on eating. So the first step is to get rid of some of those distractions. So whenever possible, and it's not always possible, right? There's times we're going to eat distracted, and that is what it is. But where we can, let's minimize that. So that means in your home, trying to eat at your table or at a countertop or an other dedicated eating space. Now, I know some of my patients have struggled with this because when we really start talking about it, it turns out that maybe they don't have a kitchen table, or their kitchen table is being used for something else. Maybe it has a lot of things on it. It has old mail and magazines, and it's just not a place that you can do much. Or maybe it's become a home office since people are working from home and weren't planning on doing that. Or maybe they don't have a table. Maybe their home is small and they don't have a kitchen table. So maybe they might have a counter or something else, but same thing. Maybe that has work or mail or other things on it, or kids' projects. So if you don't already have sort of a traditional place that's designed for eating in your house, see if you can make that happen, right? If you are able to clear that space and give yourself a space to eat at the counter or eat at a table. If you really don't have a dedicated eating space in the area you live, then you might need to be more intentional about turning off the computer, right? If you have a desk that you also share with a computer, maybe you do really the only space in your home to eat is the same space where the TV is, right? Maybe it is a chair that you eat at there. Then making sure the TV is off, right? So the first choice would be to eat at that dedicated eating place, like a table or a countertop. But if you don't have that, again, turning off that distraction that makes it really hard to be mindful while you're eating. I also don't recommend like eating in bed or again, like on a couch. Try to use those places for what they're intended. Try to eat again in a dedicated eating spot. Now, you might think eating with other people would be distracting, but in most cases, the social experience of eating with other people, whether that's a family dinner or dinner with friends or dinner with roommates, that social eating is generally pretty beneficial. For most people, they are going to slow down a little more naturally, have breaks in eating, and have conversation. And we actually have some pretty good data that mealtime for families with children is a really good way to help your children eat more balanced than regular meals. So those family meals can be really important if you have kids. So the next step after you've sort of created a good environment for yourself without the distraction of work or TV or the internet, and ideally in a dedicated eating space if you have it, is to start focusing on your food. So one of the things that I recommend is not eating directly out of a container. So let's say you're kind of having a snack, maybe it's not a formal dinner or something, you're going to eat some crackers or some chips or maybe some cashews, maybe some grapes, maybe some veggies and hummus. I would recommend trying to put that plate of food together. So actually putting the food on a plate, arranging it, and trying to come up with what you think is going to be the right portion for yourself to eat. You don't need to restrict. Don't make it too small. You'll just go back and get more, right? But give yourself what is the appropriate portion, or if you are counting calories or carbohydrates, portion that out, put it on your plate, put it in a bowl before you eat it. If you're eating directly from that bag or container, it's really easy to overeat. You don't have any external cue kind of helping you know when to stop. And it's also not as enjoyable of an experience most of the time, right? It's a lot nicer to have some cheese and crackers on a plate than to be, cutting cheese and grabbing it out of a bag for most people. So it can be a little more of an enjoyable experience. And then you know how much you've eaten, right? If you've eaten the entire plate of food and you're still hungry, you have that information instead of, kind of guessing how much you ate and not really knowing. It's really easy to overeat out of that container, especially if you're distracted. I picture myself with a bag of crackers sitting in front of TV, really easy to eat 2 or 3 or 4 times as much as you would if you just had that laid out for yourself and you turned off the TV and you really focused on that food. Okay. So next, while you're eating, you want to try to take your time. So you want to try to enjoy each bite. And if you are one of those people who eats really fast, not everyone is, but if that's something that's just how you were raised or how you are, or maybe you grew up in a time of food scarcity where you had to eat quickly to get in the food before other people got it, or I know some people who've been in the military kind of have a habit of eating quickly, and maybe it's just who you are. If you eat quickly, you might want to try tricking yourself into eating more slowly. So that might be telling yourself to put your fork down each time you take a bite, finishing that bite before you pick the fork up again. You could also try eating with your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, eat with your left hand. If you're left-handed, eat with your right. And that can be another way to switch things up and slow yourself down and stop some of those traditional habits you have with food and make yourself be a little more focused and in the moment with what you're doing. So slowing down, and again, you might have to find some ways to be really intentional about slowing down. Even if you don't think you're a fast eater, trying that intentional eating of putting the fork down each time or having a little sip of water after a bite can be helpful. So let's say you made your plate of food. Maybe you made a little plate with cheese and crackers and some carrots and cucumber, whatever your meal or your snack is. Maybe you had a dinner and it was chicken and sweet potatoes and Brussels sprouts, whatever that meal was. Once you think you have the right amount of food for your body, the amount that you plan to eat, give yourself 20 minutes or so, maybe even set a timer for 20 minutes to see how you feel before you eat more. And this can be a time when you're practicing this, you don't have to do this for every single meal, but you can reflect on what you ate. So this could be a time, man, that cheese was really satisfying. I really enjoyed it. It was really creamy and rich, just enough salt. And maybe you think about how you felt. I'm starting to feel really full and satisfied. It didn't feel like a big plate of food, but now that I'm sitting here and listening to my body, I actually do feel kind of satisfied. How did you feel eating it? Did you feel relaxed? Was it enjoyable? Or did you feel stressed and hurried? Did it take a lot of effort to think about what you were doing? How do you feel now, right? Do you feel satisfied? Do you feel full? Are you still feeling hungry? Are you craving something else? Did you eat a meal you thought you should eat, but you're still kind of in your head about the thing that you wanted, right? Maybe you had the veggies and hummus, but your brain had been telling you you wanted a cookie. How do you feel now? Do you still want that cookie, or were you able to feed yourself good fuel and now you're not craving that as much? So that's something you can do in that time period. You could also distract yourself a little bit, right? Maybe you go on a walk, maybe you read a book, maybe you do some household chores, but maybe do something and then check in with yourself in 20 minutes, see how you feel. Another way you can be more intentional about this is to do a journal. So I have a food and mood journal handout that I'll give my patients sometimes, where we don't log calories, we don't log carbohydrates. You just write down what you ate and how you felt. And you can write down how you felt before, right? Were you feeling, 10 out of 10 hungry? You were so hungry. Were you feeling stressed? Were you feeling emotional? Were you feeling excited? But what were you feeling before you ate? And then how did you feel after, right? Did you, eat pizza and then a little bit later you felt really tired? Maybe you had this energy drop, or maybe you ate a sandwich and you felt really energized and felt great, and your mood felt good and you felt ready to take on the afternoon. So writing down how you feel can be really helpful. That can help you find foods that maybe are not a great fit for you, and help you find food that's the right balance for you. And again, it brings that mindfulness to the food. Instead of just eating automatically, now you're starting to bring an awareness to it. Is this food fueling your body? Is it making you feel good? Is it making you feel full? Is it making you feel satisfied? Are you finding that half the time when you're eating is actually a response to an emotion? Are you finding that you're 10 out of 10 hungry every time you eat? And so maybe we need to have you plan a little bit sooner to eat so that you don't get to that 10 out of 10 hunger before you eat. So if this all sounds a little foreign to you, let's start thinking about it from a different direction, which is generally mindfulness. So there are things we do every day that are really mindful. We have to be thoughtful about them. And there are some that are much more automatic. We sort of do them every day. So take a moment and think to yourself. You can pause if you want. What are some of those mindless things you do? You do them every day, or you do them automatically when they need to be done without even thinking. So for me, one of those mindless things, one of the things I do automatically is brushing my teeth. I brush my teeth every night before I go to bed, and I brush them when I wake up in the morning. I think most adults do that. And if you don't, you should, right? I think the dentist would agree. But it's so automatic. I don't need a reminder. I don't have to think about it. I just automatically do it. It is on autopilot. Same thing with driving sometimes. I, get off on that same exit every day to go to work or go to my kids' school, and to the point where sometimes if I'm driving that way and I'm actually supposed to go someplace else, but it's the same sort of highway I'm starting on, I might take the wrong exit because I do it, 400 times a year. And so my brain automatically wants to go that way, right? It's kind of mindless. Another mindless thing for me is eating breakfast. I eat breakfast every day. Now, I might have to think about what I'm going to eat, but mostly that's kind of dialed in an autopilot, or my husband sometimes makes it for me. So, we're just eating breakfast sort of automatically every day in our household. It's not something we have to think about. It's a mindless sort of habit. Okay, so then let's think about things maybe that you have to be mindful for on a daily basis. What are things that require a little bit more thought and planning? So one of the things that usually requires a little more thought and planning for me, sometimes I will plan it out ahead of time, but sometimes I don't, is what I'm going to feed my kids for dinner. So a lot of times we have our meal plan kind of set out for my husband and I, what the main entree is going to be, but some of those things my kids don't eat or won't eat. And so oftentimes I have to make them something different. And so sometimes, again, that's sort of planned out, but a lot of times that's something I have to think about, like, how do I get them a balanced meal? I want them to have some protein. I want them to have some produce. Is it foods they're going to eat? So I have to put a little more thought into that than maybe the dinner I'm going to have for myself. Chores around the house. That's something that is a little bit more mindful for me, right? Is the laundry full? Do I need to get that done? Does this counter need to be cleaned off, right? Things that maybe are not automatic in the way my life or my brain works that I have to be more intentional about. So we all have these things that we do just sort of on autopilot, automatically. And there's things we have to be more thoughtful about. When it comes to food and feeding ourselves, that can be quite automatic for some people, or it can require a lot of mindfulness. And there's pros and cons to both. Being thoughtful can be good, but having some automated features, in your planning for eating can be really, really helpful too. So eating requires a lot of work, to be honest. If you haven't thought about it this way, right? Maybe you have to plan your meals. What's the menu for the week or the day? You have to shop, right? You could do that in person. You could do that virtually, but you got to get the food in some way, right? Then you got to prepare the food. Maybe you have to wash it, cut it, chop it, cook it. Then you have to eat the food, right? And so there's actually like a lot of steps to, eating and making food and fueling yourself. So some of these things, again, may be more mindful than others. So, when you go to the grocery store, do you have a plan in place? Are you thinking about what you want and need? Or do you kind of wander around and grab what looks good, what looks interesting? Are you on autopilot, right? Every time you go to the grocery store, do you buy certain things like milk and eggs and yogurt? Are there certain things that are just automatic? Apples, I don't know. Those are some automatic things for our house, right? What are those automatic things? Or are you really mindless about it, right? You go in and you're like, oh, those new chips look good. Oh, that ice cream looks good. Oh, bananas are on sale. Is it just sort of see what strikes you as you're in the grocery store? Same thing with the day-to-day meal, right? Is this something that you've planned out? You've thought about what might be options or what you're going to have that day? Or are you coming home really hungry and you're just eating the first thing that you see? So there's a lot of steps that can happen to being mindful around your food beyond just that actual process of eating, right? So there's some mindfulness that you can do before eating to prepare yourself for success and set yourself up for good food choices. So one of the other things that can trigger sort of mindless eating or mindless choices around food are emotions. And there's a whole great podcast episode about this. That's episode 10, where we talk about emotional eating, recognizing it, and what to do about it. But that's a time where mindless eating can often come in, right? If you're bored, if you're stressed, if you're kind of in a rut, those are all sort of emotional triggers that can lead you to be mindless in your eating. And so recognizing that and planning a little bit. And again, whole episode 10 about emotional eating, if you haven't checked that out. All right. So I think there's a lot of information to kind of think about in terms of being mindful around food. And we still have that exercise coming up that we're going to do. But one of the biggest things with changing your mindset is changing your mindset around this. And that is to acknowledge first that there's no right or wrong way to eat, but there is different awarenesses around your experience with food, right? So it's not wrong to eat in front of the TV or while you're working or while you're driving, but you're not going to be very aware about it, right? Just because you eat at the dinner table every night with your family doesn't mean that that's right. But let's acknowledge that there's going to be differences in how our experience with food goes based on how we eat. Okay, so there's no right or wrong, but there's going to be different experiences we have. our eating experiences are going to be unique to ourselves, right? So this kind of comes down to like taste and preference. So we all have foods that we like more than someone else. Someone else might find one food really enjoyable. My son really likes cucumbers. He eats cucumbers like every single day. I personally don't really care for cucumbers. That's not a particularly enjoyable experience for me to eat, right? And that's okay. That's not good or bad. We just have to accept that people like things differently. Like in this exercise in a minute, we're going to be eating these Hershey Kisses. I find chocolate delicious, but apparently there's some people out there who don't eat chocolate, right? So there's no good or bad. There's just our experience with food. When we are eating food, we want to make choices and pay attention to that food, right? So instead of just eating moment to moment, let's be a little more intentional. Like, let's actually make choices around the food. And we can also look at some of those immediate choices with food and eating as opposed to sort of the big picture planning things. Also, paying attention to hunger. And there was a great episode a few episodes back where I talked about the different types of hunger. Is this lack of fullness? Is this lack of feeling satisfied? Is this true hunger that's physiologic? Is this a craving? Is this wanting pleasure from foods? There's lots of different things that can be hunger. And so paying attention before we eat, how do we feel while we're eating? And then after we're eating can help us explain those different sensations a little bit better. And then we can find different solutions to those different sensations around food, because all the things we call, quote, hunger are not all the same thing. And then, as always, I encourage you to focus on your health goals. So when we make this about health and make this about feeling well and let go of judgments around food, it's a lot more easy to be mindful, right? So if you have been operating under this assumption that carbohydrates are bad, and then maybe you try oatmeal for breakfast and you find for you that you're really full and satisfied from a moderate portion of oatmeal all day and that you feel great, maybe you can let go of that idea that carbohydrates was bad in the morning. Vice versa. Maybe you've been told that, you got to watch eggs because of cholesterol, and like that was like drilled into your head, and you start eating eggs every day for breakfast and you find out that you're really full and satisfied and you have great energy and that your mood is better. Great. Like, that's your experience with that food. But if we just go based on what other people are telling us, then we don't know that. We don't know how that food affects our own body. So mindful eating lets us experience the food, really enjoy it, get pleasure from it. But it also lets us see, how does that food actually affect us? How do we feel from that food? Do we want to eat it, right? Do you feel good from oatmeal? Do you feel good from eggs? And that's important too. All right. So today's homework's a little more interactive. We're going to do it together. And if you like to watch these things, these do get put on YouTube too, so you can see this. We're going to go through an exercise. Again, I am going to be using a Hershey's Kiss. You can use any sort of wrapped candy that you have around that you enjoy, or if you don't eat candy, you could use a small piece of fruit like a strawberry or maybe a raisin. So really any sort of food will work, but maybe something that can hang out in your mouth a little bit more, so that you can really pay attention to it will be good. And I don't think you guys want to hear me like chomping on hard crackers during the podcast. So I'll have a Hershey's Kiss. Okay. And again, there's no right or wrong in this process. There's just your individual experience. So I'm going to go through a mindfulness exercise. And I actually got this from a website called meditationinschools.org. So we'll give them credit, but this is a pretty popular exercise that people have led many times when we talk about mindful eating. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you are going to look at your food. So in my case, I have this Hershey's Kiss, and I'm looking at this wrapped chocolate. And the wrapper makes a little bit of a sound when I hold it. I have a silver one, and it actually says Kisses on it, on that cute little tag that comes out of it. And when I look at this chocolate, like, there's actually some feelings for me. I like chocolate, so I'm already starting to think like, ooh, I like chocolate. I kind of think about going to the Hershey amusement park with my family, which was kind of a fun place to go. I think about how many of these I ate in college, because I set a bowl out for the residents in my hall. I was an RA to eat, and I think I ate like 90% of them. So I have that fond memory of eating these in college. So there's like a lot of thoughts before I even eat this chocolate. So, look at your food. Think about it. What emotions, what thoughts, what is there above and beyond just that food for you when you look at it? So if you have a food that's wrapped, go ahead and unwrap that food. So I'm unwrapping my Hershey's chocolate here. And now I'm going to look at the actual little Hershey's chocolate kiss. And I'm going to think about maybe its texture, its weight, its color. Next, I'm going to use another sense. I'm going to smell it. Definitely smells like chocolate. And I will admit, when I smell chocolate, I get a little bit of a brain pick-me-up. It definitely makes me feel happy. So that's my smell. And then we've looked at it, we've touched it, we've smelled it. My chocolate's not making a lot of sound. Its wrapper made a little bit. Now we're going to move on to taste. So we think about all those other sensations, not just taste when it comes to food. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to put the food in your mouth and you're going to taste it, but you're going to pay attention to some other things like consistency. What does it feel like in your mouth, on your teeth, on your tongue as it melts? So go ahead and have some of your chocolate or whatever food you're doing and see how it feels. And as you move it around in your mouth, do you feel a different area of taste? Does it feel a little different or taste a little different in different areas of your mouth? What's happening to that chocolate? Do you feel it kind of getting soft and melting? Go ahead and swallow some of it if you haven't already. How does that feel? What does that sensation feel like? I'll be honest, I have like a little bit of that, ooh, it's a lot of sugar burning sensation in my throat from it. And my mouth is quite happy. Is there a lingering taste in your mouth? And then how do you feel physically and emotionally? I feel a little weird recording myself eating and talking about it. But aside from that, I feel really satisfied. And I actually only had half of the Hershey's Kiss. But I'm like, okay, I have that sensation of chocolate. It feels good. It feels satisfied. So go ahead and take some time and you can walk through that. You can find this exercise, mindful eating, Hershey's Kiss. If you look that up, you'll find one of these online if you want to walk through it later. But that just gives you an example of how much time you really can spend thinking about and enjoying a piece of food and paying attention to it. And that's a very different experience than if I was sitting in front of the TV or doom scrolling on the internet with a bowl of Hershey's Kisses, where I might eat 6 or 10 Hershey's Kisses. And maybe my stomach starts to not feel very good by the time I realize that I've eaten too many Hershey's Kisses, compared to actually paying attention to every bit of that chocolate and enjoying it and maybe feeling a lot more satisfied and not feeling like I need to eat so many. So that's a little bit on that mindful eating experience. So in summary, mindfulness is essentially paying attention to the present moment, focusing on your feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. And so doing that with food, even if it's not every time you eat it, but doing that a few times with food, practicing that, bringing some mindfulness to your eating can make eating more enjoyable. It can make you aware of your patterns around eating, and it can help you eat a more moderate amount of food in some cases. One of the most important things to eating mindfully is going to be getting rid of distractions. So when possible, not eating while driving, not eating while watching TV, not eating while working, and trying to have a designated place in your house where you are able to eat. And then finally, if you want to practice, you can do that mindful eating exercise on your own. Again, I had fun doing it with a chocolate, but you can pick another piece of food. You could try it with a couple different things and see if there's a different experience with those different foods. And you bring these experiences to your everyday of eating, right? Take some time, slow down, enjoy your food, and see how it really makes you feel, both physically and emotionally, so that you can make the best choices for your body and your health. All right, that's it for today. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Doctor Francavilla Show, where we learn about all things related to weight and health. If you love this podcast, make sure to leave those 5-star reviews and share this podcast with a friend or loved one. If you have a topic about weight and health you want me to tackle, head over to the website, thedrfrancavillashow.com, to submit your question. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss next week's episode. Take care.